Hi, this week on the Heroes, Villains, and Sidekicks Show, we'll be exploring the origin of one of Spider-Man's oldest and most dangerous foes, Otto Octavius, or as he's non-affectionately known as, Doc Ock. What drove Otto to become one of Spider-Man's deadliest foes, coming back time after time, even back from the dead on more than one occasion? And not only did he come back from the dead, he came back as Spider-Man himself. Confused? Well, keep listening. And that's what we'll be doing on the Heroes, Villains, and Sidekicks Show. We'll be learning and talking about the origins and backstories of heroes and villains throughout the comic book universe and pop culture. We'll look at both popular characters you think you might know and obscure characters you've never heard of, but I think you'll really dig. So let's dig into the origin of Otto Octavius. Before we do though, I want to warn listeners that since we are delving into a character's history, there will be spoilers. I've had a few people say I should give a spoiler warning, so you have now been warned. Spoilers ahead. The character of Doc Ock was created by Stan Lee and artist Steve Ditko for Marvel Comics, and he first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man #3, way back in 1963. Lee has told the story that he wanted to have a villain called Octopus, and that he have multiple arms, and voila, Doc Ock was born. Like many characters in the Marvel U in the 60s, young Otto Octavius was born and raised in New York. Not New York City though, he was raised in upstate New York in a town called Schenectady. Now this is some of the fun stuff about doing the research for these. I didn't know it was in Schenectady, and why I thought that was really interesting was that my aunt used to live in Schenectady and I used to visit her there often, so it was really funny to see that name pop up in the origin of such an old villain, an old character in the Marvel U. His was the classic story of a child wonderkin raised by an overbearing and protective mother and a blue-collar abusive father. Of course, we didn't know all that back in his origins back in 1963, but in later appearances we learned just how young Otto had it, and it was pretty bad. Surviving his childhood, Otto got to leave home when he was accepted into MIT. While at school, his father was killed in an industrial accident where he worked. Otto's overbearing mother used the death of her husband to completely cement herself as the center of Otto's universe. At least she thought she was. But that relationship would be tested as Otto matured and came into his own. So after Otto graduated from MIT, one of the most prestigious colleges for technology and engineering, he landed a job at the U.S. Atomic Research Center. I know what you're thinking, atomic, radioactivity, something's going to happen here. Now to aid him in his work with radioactive materials, Otto designed and built a chest harness that controlled 4 mechanical arms that let him work with these dangerous substances from a distance. This new look earned him the name Dr. Octopus from his fellow employees, and not affectionately. See, Otto was not super popular at work. He was a bit arrogant and not very sociable, traits that would follow him throughout his life. But there was one person at work who responded to Otto's charms, Mary Anders. The co-workers started dating and became quite serious and even decided to marry. However, when Otto announced the good news to his mother, she flew into a rage, making his life unbearable, piling guilt upon guilt until he broke off the engagement. However, Otto found out his mother was dating and keeping it a secret, all the while guilting Otto for abandoning her. When Otto confronted his mother, he completely snapped, and all the years of smothering and guilt exploded out of him. And during the fight, Otto's mother died of a massive heart attack. Now Otto was completely alone and filled with guilt, anger, and bitterness over his childhood and all the mental abuse heaped upon him by his mother. Distraught and guilty over the death of his mother, Otto became careless in the lab. During an experiment when he was wearing his harness, there was an explosion and he was bombarded with volatile chemicals and radiation. Yep, radiation again, granting someone powers and not just killing them, making them die a slow and painful death. That's the wonder of comics, people. It was this potent mix that left Otto capable of mentally controlling his arms. Now it's unclear whether the accident also caused brain damage, or were all these events just too much for him, or maybe it was a bit of both. But when Otto came to in the hospital, he discovered that the accident had fused his metal arms to his body, and not only that, he can control them with his mind. With his newfound super strength, indestructible arms, and genius IQ, he realized he could now finally show everyone just how powerful he was. Now we're going to take a quick break in the show to hear from our sponsor. This podcast is brought to you by DCBS Service, Discount Comic Book Service. I've been using these guys. I looked at my account. I think I've been using them since 2004. It is an amazing service. All comics, at least 40% off, some 50% off, some 75% off. And these aren't older comics, these are your weekly books. You go to the site, you can buy them right off the site, pre-order them using previews, or you can download an Excel sheet, fill it out, send it in, pay, and then they ship them to you. Now, I know you like going to your local comic store, so do I. I still go talk to the guys, but listen, 40% off. 50% off, 75% off. Your comic order cut in half. It's hard not to. Comic books are $2.99, $3.99, $4.99, not with Discount Comic Book Service. I've been using them forever. Shipments are perfect condition. They are wrapped in plastic. They are enclosed in foam, and they are taped. I have never gotten a book damaged. It has been a perfect service. So if you want to see what it's all about, you can go over to dcbservice.com. For example, right now, you've got 50% off all Marvel Now titles. You've got DC new miniseries bundles, 50% off. Vertigo Young Animal bundles, 50% off. Just, you name it, 50% off. It's incredible. So go over again to dcbservice.com. Otto then took control of the hospital, forcing the staff to build him a new lab where he could work. Not sure why he figured he needed a lab at the moment. Okay, I've got mechanical arms, mental control over them, super strength. What else do I need? A lab built in this crowded hospital. This is when Spider-Man and Doc Ock first clash. Spider-Man crashes through the window and is soundly defeated by Doc Ock. Spidey is beaten so badly he even thinks about quitting the superhero gig. Now, after this first fight, Ock leaves the hospital and takes control of a nuclear research facility and again tries to build a lab. Spider-Man tracks him down and returns to battle him again. And this time the tables are turned and Spidey defeats Ock with one punch. Yes, things were much easier back then. Now, these little battles between the two go on for some time. Ock always being defeated, imprisoned, released, new scheme, another fight, back to prison. But it was in one of the times he was in prison that the doctors were able to remove his mechanical arms. But it was then that Ock discovered he could control his arms at a great distance with the power of his mind. Now, even with this newfound power and the realization that he can control these arms from a distance, he still could never beat Spider-Man. Realizing it was nearly impossible for him to defeat Spider-Man alone, he enlisted some additional rogues from Spider-Man's gallery. Along with Vulture, Electro, Kraven the Hunter, the original Mysterio, and Sandman, they formed the Sinister Six. This team-up occurs often, and with rotating members, but in the end, rivaling egos always scuttle their plans. This is the classic too many chefs in the kitchen. So again, the cycle repeats itself. Scheme, fight, prison, die, rise from the dead, rinse and repeat. After all his schemes, battles, resurrections, and injuries, Doc Ock realizes his body is failing him, and he is dying. He uses his recently created Octobots to sustain his life while he works out the scheme to beat all schemes. The way he is to finally defeat his nemesis, Spider-Man, is not to destroy him, it is to become him. Using his Octobots, Ock transplants his mind into the body of Peter Parker, leaving Parker's mind trapped in his dying body. Retaining all of Peter's memories, he begins to see what it's like to live the life of Spider-Man. But that's cut short when he realizes that Peter, inside Ock's body, has managed to escape prison. Otto confronts Peter, seeing the dying body he once inhabited, but Parker is ready for him. Parker tries to put his mind back into his own body, but Doc Ock informs him that he is wearing a device that will not allow that to happen. He is trapped. Otto, now inside the body of Peter Parker, deals a lethal blow to Parker. But in the moments before Parker dies, they realize that the Octobot couldn't transfer their minds, but it could connect them. Peter, realizing he's going to die and that the mind and personality of Doc Ock is now in the body of one of the most powerful heroes in the world, decides to school him on what responsibility is. Now, Ock fights it, but he can't escape the flood of memories that Parker forces him to witness. Parker being an outsider, the school joke, weak, boy genius. And we start to see, wow, these two are very much alike. Then things turn. Parker also sees Otto's life. And now this is one of the parts I really loved in this. We don't just sort of see Parker living these memories, we see a young Otto in Parker's place. So all those classic scenes we've seen through the years, Parker standing there at school looking shy, eating wheat cakes with his Aunt May, Uncle Ben, we see all that, but we don't see Parker drawn in there. We see Otto Octavius. It's very moving. And then what happens is we get the reversed. Parker sees Otto's memories. So we see Parker as Otto, and not with loving parents, but with an abusive father. We see Otto eating wheat pancakes. Parker is Otto getting beaten. Otto as Parker standing over a dead Uncle Ben. We see how these two men are so similar, but slight twists and turns in their lives made them become two very separate people, very different people. In the end, Parker forces Otto to learn what he learned long ago, that with great power comes great responsibilities. Tears are streaming down Peter and Otto's face, and I have to say, when I read it, I was actually pretty moved. It was one of the most moving moments in comics I've read. I have to admit, I'm a huge Spider-Man fan, and Doc Ock is one of my favorite characters, just because he is so similar to Parker, but with that extra bit of brokenness that makes him a villain. Now Parker, trapped in Otto's body, dies, and a new Spider-Man is born. Now unfortunately, while he has learned what it means to be a hero, what it means to feel the pain of loss, and why helping people matters more than anything, he is still Otto Octavius. He is vain and arrogant, and in the moment of announcing himself as Spider-Man, he realizes and believes he can do it better. He is, by all his accounts, superior than everyone. So he announces he will not just be Spider-Man, but the superior Spider-Man. Now, as you might have guessed, things do not go well, and it's the classic story of the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Otto's decisions while trying to do good, they really just make matters worse. But at one point, we learn that Parker's mind is not dead, but it has been dormant in the mind of the superior Spider-Man, in his own body. Now, there is a battle of minds, and Parker comes out on top, and Otto's mind is exorcised from Parker's body. Once again, Peter is in control of his own body, and Ock has been defeated and killed. But wait, remember, this is a comic. Unbeknownst to all, Otto, before his mind was lost forever, transfers himself into a robot assistant he created, and is waiting for the time to spring his next scheme. And that's the origin of Otto Octavius. Now, when the whole Superior Spider-Man thing happened, there was of course the usual uproar. Fans freaked out. How could Dan Slott do this, killing off Peter Parker? And that freak out always confuses me and makes me laugh. Because, we all read comics. We all know Parker isn't dead. Parker will be back. They're not going to kill off the main character, the symbol of Marvel Comics. And of course he did come back. But I have to tell you, I really enjoyed those comics. I loved seeing Otto as Spider-Man, the decisions he made, how he changed sort of the Marvel U, how he changed the character, knowing all the while Peter Parker would come back. And I thought it was just a really good read. I loved that they did something different with the character, and I'm curious to see what they're going to do with Otto now. Does he remember? Does he remember who Peter Parker is? Does he remember he's Spider-Man? It's going to be really interesting. Now, Marvel just did that huge relaunch after Secret Wars, and I was really hoping in the Spider-Man title they would keep a few things from the previous incarnation. And one of the things was that Otto is still inside the robot assistant, and they did keep that. So now here's this big clunky robot that's in the background. Otto is actually inside that robot. He is the robot. And I'm really curious to see what's going to be happening. And it looks like the next storyline is where Otto reemerges. Now, before I wrap up the show, I'd like to plug one of my favorite podcasts that quite serendipitously had an entire segment about our villain this week. Now, on the July 8th episode of the Creature Geek podcast, it's a show that deals with monster movie makeup and prosthetics and things like that. They had Frank Langley on, and he just happened to be the one who led the team that puppeteered the arms of Doc Ock in the Spider-Man 2 movie. Now, yes, some of it was CGI, but a huge part of it was straight practical effects. And it's a really interesting story how they did it. how they created the arms, how they puppeteered them, and a little sort of backstory into the CGI practical effects war. It's a great website, and it's a great podcast. It's called Creature Geek, and you can find the links to their podcast over at our site, of course, Heroes, Villains, and Sidekicks.com. Well, I want to thank you for listening to this week's episode of Heroes, Villains, and Sidekicks. Our theme music is by Broke for Free, and you can find links to other music from the show on our website, Heroes, Villains, and Sidekicks.com. There you can listen to the show, subscribe via whichever service you use, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, whatever you want. And if you have time, please leave a rating for us and maybe some feedback over on iTunes when you subscribe and download the show. It really helps a lot. We'll be back next week with more Heroes, Villains, and Sidekicks. Take care.